What's up guys, Sean here, and today we're going to talk about the internet sensation that is sweeping the nation, and of course I'm talking about Baby Yoda. But before we get started, yes, I'm still selling this t-shirt. You can use the promo code DUMBPROMO for 10% off. Links are in the description box of this video. Let's get into the video. So as we talked about in my previous video, it appears that The Mandalorian, which is the Disney Plus exclusive series that follows a Mandalorian across the Star Wars universe, is one of these shows that finally satisfies the needs of long-term Star Wars fans. People who like the original trilogy but don't really care for Disney's sequel trilogy. And one of, if not the most popular thing to come out of the Mandalorian series are the images of Baby Yoda. People absolutely love this thing. I mean, when that episode came out, whenever it came out, I don't know, my Twitter feed was completely flooded with Baby Yoda. And it wasn't just my Twitter feed, it was all my personal and private social media accounts, which were also being flooded with Baby Yoda by my friends and family. Now, of course, just like we talked about in my previous video on The Mandalorian, due to the fact that the original trilogy people seem to be embracing The Mandalorian, that means people on the far left are attacking The Mandalorian. And for those of you who aren't familiar, quick rundown, Anita Sarkeesian put out a series of tweets critiquing The Mandalorian because she believed that there weren't enough women in the first episode or the series overall, therefore it's sexist, therefore feminism hasn't taken enough root in The Mandalorian, therefore The Mandalorian is bad. Now, of course, as I said in my previous video on this topic, the reason why the far left decides to attack things that are popular is a combination of factors. The first is obvious. They're trying to get attention. You put something like Baby Yoda in your thumbnail, like I'm going to do for this video, and a significant portion of the population is going to click on that because Baby Yoda is popular. And the second is because they can't stand the original Star Wars fandom and the original Star Wars movies because they're under the belief that the original Star Wars movies and the fandom don't reflect their values enough, and according to them, absolutely everything should reflect their values. So when you have something like The Mandalorian, which is popular with the original fan base, people on the far left are going to look for reasons to critique it and look for reasons to explain why the original fan base likes it, and that is usually due to the fact that they believe that the original fan base is misogynistic, racist, etc., etc. And the latest iteration of this phenomenon is the recent articles comparing the very popular Baby Yoda with Rey, who is the lead of the sequel trilogy. And essentially the argument goes like this. Baby Yoda used Force powers without any training, and people have been criticizing Rey for being a Mary Sue for doing that very same thing. Therefore, the Star Wars fan is hypocritical, and it's not so much about training or being a Mary Sue, it's more about Rey being a woman and Baby Yoda being perceived to be a dude. I don't know for a fact if Baby Yoda is a dude, don't really care, but that's the argument being put forward. Now, before we get into that, I would like to go over what exactly a Mary Sue is, because a lot of people seem to be getting this concept wrong, and I actually think that there is some unfair applications of the Mary Sue stereotype to Rey from the sequel trilogy, and I want to go over where I think she is in fact a Mary Sue, and where I think that she's just not a Mary Sue, and where people are kind of overstating their case against this character. Now, the concept of a Mary Sue came about because of a comic book that was mocking fan insert or fan fiction characters specifically related to the Star Trek franchise. The character Mary Sue was presented as a character in Star Trek who happened to be more logical than Spock, a better leader than Kirk, a better doctor than Bones, and I don't know, more Scottish than Simon Pegg. Honestly, I'm not a big Star Trek person, so don't ding me for my lack of knowledge. But on top of the fact that this fanfiction Star Trek satire character was better at every individual thing that made the individual characters in the original Star Trek show unique and good, this character also never came into conflict with any of those other characters. This was the entire joke of what a Mary Sue is. You have a character that is obviously reminiscent of the fans. It's a fan insert character that is far superior at every individual skill to all the crew members, and also never comes into conflict because as a fan, you're likely to love this show, so you wouldn't want to go into conflict with any of these characters. And unfortunately, characters like that tend to make boring characters because they're perfect at everything, and contrary to popular belief, the thing that we like about characters is not their strengths, it's actually their flaws. because their flaws are what make them human. Now, by this very strict and limited definition, Rey is in fact a Mary Sue. She is a character with a vast variety of skills, and she often appears to be more skilled than more established characters within the Star Wars canon at certain things that there's really no explanation for her being more skilled than them as. She's also immediately accepted by all of the characters that are very popular with the fandom, and she rarely, if ever, comes into conflict with any of the characters that, as an audience, you already like and enjoy. So by that standard, again, Rey, very much a Mary Sue, very much like a fan fiction type of character. However, while it is clear-cut by the original definition that Rey is in fact a Mary Sue, the original definition isn't really what's being used by people on the internet when they're referring to Rey. The way that the Mary Sue has evolved over time in online dialogue is essentially that a Mary Sue is a character that has a vast variety of skills that are not properly explained in the story. Now, by that definition, it's actually more of a mixed bag for Rey, especially when it comes to her first movie, Star Wars The Force Awakens, because a lot of the things that people say aren't really explained or are very Mary Sue-ish are actually set up for in that movie. Now, don't get me wrong, there are feats in The Force Awakens that defy explanation and defy reason and kind of go against what we know to be true in the Star Wars mythos, but there are some feats that people describe that just don't fit that bill. For instance, one of the things that people often tout as an example of Rey's Mary Sue-ness is her ability to fix and fly a ship like the Millennium Falcon without any prior training in those areas. First off, flying ships in Star Wars has always been something that the franchise has been really stupid about. I mean, when you think about it, Luke is a moisture farmer on Tatooine who by the end of the first movie is flying an X-Wing into the Death Star into a firefight and sinking the final shot to blow up the Death Star. Anakin is even worse. He is a slave that is somehow building a pod racing thing, and for whatever reason, for little baby Anakin, him building that pod and knowing how to drive a land-based vehicle can somehow translate into him flying a ship and destroying a whole bunch of stuff at the end of Phantom Menace. So for whatever reason, in the Star Wars universe, it has been established with other characters that driving a land-based vehicle somehow translates to you being able to fly a spacecraft. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but in reality, it would be more weird in terms of the Star Wars canon if a Star Wars character wasn't able to fly a spaceship than they actually were, based on stuff that we've seen from the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. And as for fixing the Millennium Falcon's hyperdrive on the fly when she's never actually been in the ship, again, it's not the best explanation, but she was portrayed as a junker who was taking parts from old Empire ships and selling them off. You would presume that in order for her to make her living doing that, she would have to know in some way what she's looking at. And it's not that odd to say that if you're able to identify and take apart parts, that you might be able to recognize how to put them back together. Again, does Rey have way too many attributes and skills that it actually seems weird for all of them to be compiled within a single character in the Star Wars universe? Absolutely. Are some of those skills and attributes not well explained and not well defined in the sequel trilogy? Absolutely. But we can't take the ones that are well defined, or at least the ones that there is an attempt at an explanation of, and combine them with the ones that aren't and act like we're putting forward legitimate criticism. Which brings me to my next point, which people consider to be the strongest case for Rey being a Mary Sue when it comes to Star Wars The Force Awakens. And that is Rey defeating Kylo Ren in the first movie in single combat without any prior Jedi training. Now, while I will grant you that Rey's unexplained ability to resist Kylo Ren's Force interrogation technique doesn't make any sense, Kylo Ren is obviously way more skilled in the Force, he's way more familiar with the Force, so for somebody who is an amateur, whether they're Force sensitive or not, to be able to not only resist, but then backfire the attack onto the person who is more experienced doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'll also grant that from a narrative point of view, it definitely doesn't make a lot of sense for the main villain to suffer a defeat in the first movie, which is the first act of a 3-movie structure. The fight between Rey and Kylo Ren is actually really well explained in The Force Awakens. Again, you cannot like it from a narrative point of view, viewing this as a trilogy because it undercuts the tension going forward in the trilogy, but within The Force Awakens, a lot of time is spent establishing why somebody like Kylo Ren might lose that kind of fight. Very early on, when Kylo Ren is talking to Snoke, Snoke is very critical of Kylo Ren because he believes that he's not pure enough with the dark side of the Force. He actually says to him that you have too much light side in your power, and that is what is in fact weakening you. And we know from watching the Star Wars original trilogy and the prequel trilogy that being uncertain tends to lose to having either a pure calm or a pure rage. Uncertainty in Star Wars loses to purity. See Luke in his battle with Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi, where Darth Vader is conflicted. He's obviously the way more experienced Jedi, but Luke has that rage boost and he just starts wailing on him, setting all technique aside, and eventually defeats his father. I mean, again, statistically on paper, Vader has decades worth of experience on Luke, and he probably shouldn't have lost that. See Obi-Wan defeating Darth Maul right after his master, who should be more skilled and more talented than him, just got killed by Darth Maul due to the fact that Obi-Wan had that rage boost. Now, Kylo Ren clearly not as powerful as Darth Vader, and he was already established in the movie to have inner conflict that was diminishing his ability to use the Force. He thought, as a remedy to that inner conflict, it made sense for him to kill Han Solo, his father, to kind of sever his ties with the light side of the Force. Unfortunately, this had the opposite effect, and it just made him uncertain, which makes a lot of sense because killing your father should make you more uncertain. And on top of that, Kylo Ren was also wounded. Now, when you combine all of these factors and then you put him against Rey, who is working off a rage boost, you can understand why Kylo Ren would not come out on top. He's completely unfocused, he's wounded, and Rey is focused and she has the rage boost that we've seen many times within Star Wars. Again, you don't have to like it. I think narratively, this was a disastrous creative choice because how am I going to take Kylo Ren seriously when he just got beaten by an amateur because he can't control his emotions? But my negative feelings about The Force Awakens and Rey aside, I can't pretend that the movie didn't set something up when I can clearly watch the movie and see them working really hard to set something up. Now, while I just got through explaining to you why I think the idea of Rey being a Mary Sue is actually unfairly attributed to her when it comes to The Force Awakens, I believe that The Last Jedi kind of confirmed what everybody was worried about, that her character was heading in that direction. Because unlike Luke, who did have a victory in the first movie, and arrogantly decided to forego training in order to rescue the friends because Luke was overconfident and he believed that nothing could stop him, he thought he was invincible, Rey did the same exact thing, but wasn't punished for it in the same way that Luke did. Rey wasn't shown what she doesn't know. She wasn't humbled. She wasn't humiliated. She kind of just accomplished everything that she set out to accomplish. Also, in order to explain Rey's feats throughout the sequel trilogy, The Last Jedi decided to just say that if somebody is powerful on the dark side of the Force, then automatically the Force will create somebody just as powerful on the light side of the Force, which is a absolutely terrible explanation and kind of goes against the entire canon of Star Wars, because the explanation is you don't have to explain it. For me, it is that lack of explanation and her feats in The Last Jedi, which basically cement Rey as a Mary Sue for me. But we're gonna move on to Baby Yoda, because Baby Yoda, according to the far left, is just as much a Mary Sue as Rey. And the reason we know that is because in one scene in The Mandalorian, Baby Yoda used the Force to lift an animal and then immediately passed out. Now, if you can't tell by my tone of voice, I don't really buy this comparison. I don't think it's a fair comparison, and I don't think it's a one-to-one comparison. First of all, yes, Baby Yoda lifted something and then saved the character in The Mandalorian, the main character of the show. Try not to be very spoilery for you guys. Also, I haven't seen it. I've literally just gone off what I've read about this. But Baby Yoda, according to people that I trust and according to articles that I've seen written about it, passed out immediately after doing this. And in the show's logic, the reason Baby Yoda is such a target by everybody is because members of the Yoda race are supposed to be extra force sensitive, and thus these creatures are perceived as a threat by people who are on the dark side of the force. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Sean, okay, you answered the question that is the main topic of the video. Why is there so much time left in this video? And that's because I actually want to talk about what I think is the actual problem with Baby Yoda. And it's exactly that explanation, the idea that members of the Yoda race happen to be extra force sensitive according to the canon. I actually think that this, more than anything, is the thing to be more critical of Baby Yoda than anything, because it actually runs completely contrary to what Yoda's narrative purpose was in the original trilogy. You see, what makes Yoda so magical in The Empire Strikes Back and in the original trilogy is what Yoda means for the Force, what Yoda, being such a little guy, represents in the overall storyline. And that's the idea that the Force isn't physical, it's magical. You would never expect a hero to be a small little gremlin that's like eating garbage and messing around. You expect a hero to be a 6-foot-tall humanoid. Yoda being so small and at the same time being regarded as one of the greatest Jedi Masters of all time tells you so much about the Force through the visuals alone, and films are visual storytelling, that it's almost the perfect choice for that character. And that's why that character has resonated with fans throughout so many years. But the reason that works is because it shows that the Force is something that is far outside the physical, which is one of the lessons that Yoda was literally teaching Luke when he was training him.
It's too big. Size matters not. Look at me. Judge me by my size, do you? And binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter.
Now, if you're following along with what I'm telling you the narrative purpose for Yoda was in the original trilogy, and why I enjoy Yoda and why he's such a magical character, then you understand why I don't care for Baby Yoda. Because the idea that Yoda is a part of an alien race that is genetically predisposed to be able to use the Force well completely flies in the face of what Yoda represents as a character. Also, one of the things that I absolutely can't stand about the sequel trilogy, and a lot of these sequels to long-established franchises, is that these movies are full of fan service. They're full of stuff taken and removed from context from the originals and then put in front of you just so you as an audience can be like, I know what that is. That runs completely contrary to filmmaking. And Yoda, Baby Yoda, I'm sorry, is a perfect example of this. It is something that we know. We all like Yoda from the original trilogy, but it's Disney-fied. It's made into a baby. It's the cutest thing ever. Who cares that it runs completely contrary to what Yoda stands for as a character? It's so cute. Let's all buy it. I want that toy. Now look, you can disagree with me completely. You can understand where I'm coming from, but decide that, hey, you like The Mandalorian overall, and even though there are some clearly obvious fan service stuff in The Mandalorian, in the context of it being a good show, you're okay with it. But for me, Star Wars is always going to be, from what I can tell, 3 good movies, and that's it. I've never been interested in anything in Star Wars outside of the original trilogy. I don't read the books, I don't like the prequels, I don't care for the sequels, I don't care for these one-off movies. It's just not for me. It's just too much fan service, too much callbacks to the original, and a lot of times those callbacks completely undercut the original. I want this franchise to evolve. I want to build on the original trilogy, put out something new and interesting, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm certain that I managed to make everyone angry with this video, so let me know how angry you are in the comments down below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias if you want to support me. I got a Teespring store, Patreon, Venmo, PayPal, Subscribestar. This has been me talking about Baby Yoda. Till next time.